Those are the headlines we're tracking, and we'll go to some of those stories in just a bit. But let's start first with a big debate tonight. Should you work harder or smarter? Well, there's been a lot of debate on this one. Well, now Michael Dell, the CEO of Dell Technologies, has said that today's workforce should work smarter, and not harder. They should have a good mix of working and playing. He said, and I quote, "I realized long ago there is a point of diminishing returns to the hours worked in a day." Now, these comments of his are generating a lot of interest on social media related to work-life balance. They seem to be sharply in contrast to the hustle culture that's celebrated and propagated across the industry, especially the tech industries, because some leaders right here in India and abroad as well have been vocal proponents of the hustle culture. But the question is, are enough companies walking the talk when they publicly speak about having a work-life balance versus productivity? Well, that's a big debate tonight, and joining us to discuss that and deliberate upon that further is Lloyd, Mathias, Independent Director, Ramani Dathi, the Chief Financial Officer of Teamlease Services, and Mitali Nikore, the founder and economist at Nikore Associates. Thank you very much, ladies, and of course, Lloyd, for joining us here on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mitali. Now, interesting comments coming in from a tech CEO. Now, when we look at the work hours that are clocked per week in countries, by employees, now China is slightly over 46 hours, the US is slightly over 38 hours, UK around 35 hours, and India at 48 hours. In light of this data, in view of this data, what the Dell CEO actually said, do you think that is actually implementable? And are companies walking the talk?
Thanks, Sumita, for getting me into this conversation. And, I think we've been debating this all year round this year, ever since Mr. Murthy first began this debate in a way, talking about the 70-hour work week. And I definitely want to say, we really have to understand that, for instance, women in this country are already doing maybe 140-hour work weeks because, they're putting in their 8 or 10 hours at the paid workplace. And then they do at least 5 to 6 hours of unpaid domestic care work every day. So, that kind of a life is already something that the Indian women are seeing. And it's very difficult, for male CEOs and for male tech founders to actually understand that. And I think I really respect the CEO of Dell for coming out and really talking about work-life balance, because the young people are really asking us, is this the kind of work-life we can expect for the rest of our lives? And that's not sustainable at all.
Right. Right, Mitali, let me take that question to Ramani. Ramani, the big question is, how many companies are actually implementing this in their own organizations, and how many CEOs are actually walking the talk?
Hi, Sumita. Yes, if we look at the corporates in India, most of them go with the 40 to 48-hour working hours. But at the same time, is it uniformly implemented, and are the employees having the right work-life balance? Changes from company to company. And more importantly, we should look at outcomes rather than efforts, because I kind of disagree with the fact that the more number of working hours are directly linked to productivity and outcomes. So we should measure the employee productivity based on outcomes and not just on number of hours.
Right. Let me come to you on that point, Lloyd, sir, and thank you very much for very patiently waiting it out. I want to now bring in an economic point of view, because, there may be differences over whether how much one wants to work, and this is related to personal choices, but also how much, the work limits that are imposed by companies. But that said, employees are in a way clocking way more, according to the data that I mentioned at the top of the show. But the bigger question is there a wider problem out there? Because, how India Inc. works and how they look at, working hours vis-a-vis as compared to the real wages that have actually plummeted. In fact, I have some data also to quote from Quest Corp's. Average salaries in the country have increased only by 1 to 5% per year. And if that means adjusted for inflation, which basically means that more people were earning 5 years back than what they are earning now. In fact, the data also states that, for example, in the BFSI sector, if people in 2019 were earning slightly over 15,000, in 2023 are only earning 17,000 more. So the big question really is that wages have not kept pace with the demands of corporate India.
Thank you, Sumita. I think the issue is a little wider. There are two parts to it. The first part is clearly as a corporate workspace in India, there's no denying the fact that Indians are overworked. Now, whether this is commensurate with the kind of output, I think that's questionable. But there's no denying the fact that in general, we tend to work much longer hours. As much as there's a law stipulating a certain number of work hours, I think in many organizations, that's not really followed in its entirety or in its spirit. One part is also about the fact that, as a nation, culturally, people tend to kind of keep much longer hours because there's a belief that, a company has rewarded you with a job, now you give your best for it. The other part, which is more realistic, is the fact that it is a highly competitive work scenario. For every, good job, I mean, there are at any point in time, at least 2 or 3 times the number of candidates available. So therefore, employers have the upper hand and therefore they can push their workforces. Now, this tends to get a lot more acute when you come to things like startups, where there is a tremendous amount of work pressure, understandably, right? They're going for enormous growth on the back of recently acquired funding. So I think there is some opportunity. And of course, there are other larger companies, Indian arms of global MNCs, where people tend to put inordinately long hours. Having said which, I think ours is just one part of the problem. The larger issue is in terms of burnout. Does it stress employees? Are they making a lot of compromises on their personal front? And as Mitali rightly pointed out, especially for the female part of the workforce, the reality is that they also take on so much more of the home front. And I think as long as organizations don't recognize that, we're always going to face a problem. I think the first is to recognize that an employee is meant to be a productivity tool, but he's a human being first, and therefore treat him fairly, give him that adequate amount of time to take his leave, to take whatever time off required. And the second point really is about also recognizing that people have different limits. What seems like overwork to someone who really enjoys his job and is happy to spend 10 to 12-hour days may seem like a lot of stress to somebody else. So make sure it's not one size fits all, and recognize the issue of burnouts and mental health. And I think that part is very important. So what Michael Dell has said, I think plays a big role, specifically given the fact that not very long ago, Mr. Narayana Murthy went on a totally different trajectory. And given the stage of life he is in, I mean, he's entitled to his point of view, but it may not be very relevant to today's generation.
Yes, and that's a very interesting point, Lloyd, that we will, of course, take it up later on the show on the kind of expectations that Gen Z now really has and whether India Inc. is able to keep up with those expectations. And the second point about productivity as well, I'm going to touch upon all of those points in just a bit. But Mitali, let me take up that point about wage growth, because India's CEA, Ananta Nageswaran, just a couple of days back said that while companies' profits were at a 15-year high in March, but salaries really haven't really moved at that pace. So when India Inc. leaders, for example, speak about long working hours, are they ready to do something about the wages, because the larger consumption story of the country is also getting hit?
Absolutely, Sumita. I mean, this is exactly what I was also looking at. In some of the data, we're starting to see a wage stagnation, and that is linked to two major trends that we're seeing. The first trend is a stagnation even in the skills of the junior employees that are coming into the corporate sector. We're starting to see that companies have to incur very high costs for training and retraining, the new recruits that they're getting in. And that kind of, reduces the amount that they can pay in salaries, but it goes into kind of like a training cost for these employees. The second aspect is with respect to the middle management disappearance that we are starting to see in the corporate sector. A lot of people, they experience burnout in their early 30s and their mid 30s. And then they say, you know what, why do I have to earn this company, so much money? I can just start my own small business. And through that, I can earn much more. I can service the company. And that's why today India Inc. faces a crisis of mid management. And the basic thing that they are actually spending on is that highly skilled CEO or senior manager who actually leads the company. That's where we see the wage growth. And we actually see a wage reduction at the junior levels. So there is really a need for companies to come up and think that, how do we want to actually organize our workforce? How do we want to look at distributing the gains from the profits that are coming in and ensuring that the well-being of the workforce is prioritized?
Absolutely, absolutely, Mitali. In fact, when you speak about salaries of top CEOs, in fact, we were just speaking to a couple of experts. They said the top 5% salaries have gone up by 50 to 60%. For the bottom 20%, however, salaries have gone up only by 20 to 25%. Let me come to you, Ramani, on that point. Is India Inc. then indulging in profiteering thanks to lack of good jobs? And of course, like Lloyd was also mentioning, there is a technological angle also coming up. There is AI, so that of jobs getting lost as well.
No, absolutely. Especially over the last 2 years, if I have to unpack the salary inflation and IT and non-IT, there is a stark difference. Because in IT sector, because of the global headwinds, we are seeing stagnation in the salary levels. It's hardly 1 or 2% average annual hikes. Whereas on non-IT, while it is 6 to 8% average salary hikes, which is in line with retail inflation, it is not taking into consideration of the fact that there is a much higher inflation in lifestyle expenses, healthcare expenses, or be it education, real estate. So this is not the salary inflation is not in line with the overall increase in cost of living. And particular to IT, as you rightly mentioned, the impact of technology, AI, ML is also putting a lot of pressure, especially at entry level and mid level talent salary levels.
Okay. Mitali, let me come to you on that point, and Lloyd, I'd come to you after Mitali. Now, if India has to keep growing at this 7 to 8% growth rate, and of course, everybody's saying that make in India is the next big story to watch out for, what is the rate at which wages should move from where we currently are at?
That's, of course, $1 million question. Can we actually put a number to it? But definitely they have to move higher and at almost the same rate at corporate profits. I mean, at the end of the day, if we keep on growing the corporate profits, there's only a certain class of individuals, the 1%ers, the 2%ers who are going to benefit. But what we actually need in this country is to reduce income inequality, at least our corporate sector workers. Has focused entirely on the urban corporate sector, which also
We're losing your audio. If you could fix your audio, and we'll come back to you in just a bit. But let me come to you, Lloyd. You mentioned about Gen Z and expectations, because Gen Z is looking at this work-life balance story quite differently and won't think twice before demanding what they think they deserve, and doesn't really believe in extremes. But because you're consulting with several organizations and you worked in the capacity of leading marketing teams at Pepsi, at HP, and several other organizations, now are organizations coming to terms with what Gen Z is expecting out of them?
To a large extent, Sumita, that's true. A lot of organizations are recognizing that if they have to improve their employer brand, if they have to attract the right kind of talent, then they certainly should be looking at what the new generation of employees are seeking, right? Which is a good work-life balance, which is a comfortable corporate where they have a certain amount of flexibility, whether it's working from home, whether it's the way they can dress, and also organizations that look at a certain degree of cognitive diversity, which is not just about gender, but also recognizing that people can come from different backgrounds and can all enjoy the same workspace, right? So the ability to make your workplace as close to possible, as comfortable as, let's say, your non-workplace, which is typically your home. So organizations are working towards it, but I wouldn't say that's happening all across. You have to recognize that we talk of India, there are various Indias. One is the kind of corporate India where you're talking of people in the organized sector. And then, of course, you have a lot of the unorganized sector where there are still some areas, some issues to go. But just coming back a bit to the question that you posed to Mitali on salaries, I mean, the reality is that, yes, salaries haven't been keeping pace for the simple reason that the clear expectation everyone has is that his salary has to at least beat inflation by 2 or 3%. And given the fact that in the last few years, our inflation has hovered between 4 and 6, people do expect more. And if that doesn't happen, that obviously is a bit of resentment. Though that should be seen in the light of purchasing power parity. The fact that in the last 2 decades, India has seen a huge surge. So our salaries have closed in on the large gap there was with global. I think that's come down to a level, but there's no denying there's some degree of dissatisfaction. Though, like I always believe, looking at salary and looking at work pressure may not necessarily be in the same window. It doesn't mean that if you kind of put in 70 to 90 hours a week, you should get paid more. I think finally it's a factor of being able to work, to deliver your best, to produce your best output, at the same time not be stressed and not burn out.
Absolutely, because it's very important to take time off, and that really leads to productivity for companies themselves as well. And this is something that India Inc. really needs to understand, that before they put those kind of unfair and undue demands on employees or potential employees. But Ramani, do you think enough companies are looking at revising wages in the new year and making some kind of adjustments with respect to work-life balance and how they really approach this issue? Because Mitali was also mentioning, and I think Lloyd sir was also mentioning, that this entire year has been all about ensuring a work-life balance, and there's been a lot of debates on this issue as well.
In supplying entry-level talent, Sumita. And the biggest challenge that our clients pose is employee attrition at entry level. So it's almost in the range of 40 to 60% attrition in 0 to 2 year experienced. And when they conduct the employee surveys, the two biggest reasons is, first, definitely the salary levels at entry levels are very low, and the annual hikes are also not up to their expectation. Second is work-life balance. So now it's time that corporates, in order to fix the attrition and in turn to derive higher productivity from the employees, they have to focus on these two elements definitely in the coming financial year.
All right. With that, it's a wrap on this debate. Thank you very much, Mitali, Lloyd sir, and of course, Ramani, for joining us to discuss your perspectives.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.